Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to continue with the leaks, and this time we're having a look at British ground. The first vehicle is the Light Tank Mark VIII. This vehicle is actually known as the Harry Hopkins, which is a fantastic name. They built about 100 of these, and the idea was it was going to be a replacement for the Tetrarch, which is obviously already in War Thunder. And also, there was a variant of a vehicle that was developed off the Harry Hopkins we also have in War Thunder, which is the Alecto SPG. But the Harry Hopkins hasn't made it yet. The vehicle, being a small light tank, was supposed to be manufactured in the thousands. The first production order for this vehicle was actually 1,000 tanks, and this was made in 1941. And then it was actually increased to 2,410. Production itself began actually in June 1942, and there was a bunch of problems. They had to do a bunch of modifications to the vehicle, and they meant that by 1943, the middle of it, they'd only actually produced 6 of them, and only a total of 100 which were produced by February 1945, which was kind of worthless. The vehicle had access to a 2-pounder gun. It also had a 149 horsepower engine and was able to motor around a little bit, but unfortunately by the time it went into full production and was fully manufactured, it was basically seen as obsolete. The vehicle didn't bring anything new to the table, and also there were nations which were doing other stuff just better than it. The British eventually just went over and used the Lend-Lease Stuart tanks instead of stuff like the Harry Hopkins for the roles it was intended, and the ones that were built were actually given to the RAF randomly and were used as airfield defense, just to give you an idea of how far this vehicle had fallen. The vehicle is marred in so many issues and controversies, but as a standard vehicle is a really fun one. It would have access to, of course, smoke grenades too, and a little bit of armor on the vehicle. Hopefully at some point this vehicle can come to the game as the larger brother of the Tetrarch. The next vehicle is the Ram Mark I. This vehicle is a Canadian cruiser tank and was developed during the Second World War. What is interesting about it is it's actually based off a modified M3 tank chassis, which, we have the M3 Lee in the game, we also have the Grant, but this one would be, of course, slightly different. The vehicle itself was brought about as an idea in the early war, basically because Canada was struggling to actually order a bunch of tanks from the US. After the invasion of France, and also with Britain being pushed back to Dunkirk and having to retreat back to Britain, Canada realized that it might be worth them trying to increase their armored forces. So the federal government ordered the Canadian Pacific Railway to produce British Valentine tanks, and also to look into options of buying vehicles overseas. Unfortunately, they couldn't really buy a ton of vehicles from America because most of them were being shipped to Britain at the time, and decided that they were going to take the US M3 medium tanks and remove the parts that made it, the M3 medium, and create their own tank in the form of the Ram. So they removed the 75 in the chassis, obviously they removed the turret as well, and they added their own turret which housed the 2-pounder gun, the 40mm from the British. So this was the first variant of the Ram. They also changed a few other things, moved the driver's spot from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, and also some other changes too. This was, of course, the first Ram tank which was around. The Mark II improved it by fixing a bunch of the mechanical stuff inside, but the major difference was the 57mm. The 6-pounder gun was installed instead of the 2-pounder. By the time the 2-pounder was on the Ram in 1941, it was already being seen as obsolete, which meant that it had to be changed. This was when stuff like the Panzer IIIs and also Panzer IVs were starting to properly come out, but the Panzer IIIs was the major issue with the long-barreled 50mm and also the additional armor plating, meaning that they were able to outrange the 2-pounder gun. The next vehicle is another SARC. We already have some of the SARCs in the game, but this one is a bit of an odd one. It's the Mk IV.F. Now, the Mk IV.F came around basically because the Mk IV was based on the Marmon Harrington. This vehicle was pretty good for what it needed to be, but they were running into problems with actually getting a bunch of Marmon Harrington kits to be able to convert them to the Mk IV standard. So instead, they started building them off the Canadian Ford F60L, which was a 3-ton truck chassis, and the British were able to basically make a ton of Mark IVs based off of this. So it still had, you know, the standard stuff. It had access to the standard guns. You know, it could technically get the 2-pounder. Also, you would have stuff like the 6-pounder, or even stuff like the 3.7mm howitzer version. My guess is they'll probably add the 2-pounder or the 6-pounder, since that one's a bit more standard. But yeah, so this would be more of a standard Canadian vehicle, which would be based off the similar ideas that we've already seen. With the Fox coming to the game, there was also another vehicle that was leaked a few years ago. This is the FV-107 Scimitar. The Scimitar is kind of similar to the idea of the Fox, apart from it's a tracked vehicle that is based on a similar chassis that you find on the FV-101 Scorpion. The major similarity between this and the Fox is that it has access to the 30mm Radon cannon, which we all know and love or hate, depending on who you are. This vehicle is a reconnaissance vehicle, and it is small. It was used basically during a lot of the wars of the last 50 years, the Falklands, the Gulf War, Kosovo. It was used in the Iraq War. It's been all around the place for the British, and it has access to quite a small engine, 190 horsepower Cummins, but also can go about 80 kilometers an hour. This vehicle is not heavy. It is made basically out of aluminium, so very similar to a lot of the other light tanks that you see from a lot of other nations. Like the American kind of 9.0 to 10.0 light tanks are all made of aluminium alloys and stuff like that. So nothing too crazy at the end of the day. This vehicle is also not just operated by Britain, or it isn't operated by Britain anymore, sorry, but it is operated by some other countries such as Latvia, still have some in service, which is pretty fun. The other interesting thing about the Simi is the Mark II, which is slightly different and actually has much more kind of, I suppose, modern systems in it for survivability, such as mine protection and other parts. But if we're just looking at the Simi in general, it will probably just be the standard one with the L21 Radon cannon. Overall, a nice little light vehicle to cap off what has been most light vehicles in this league list. As always, though, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.